You're listening to the Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole, a Ragaku podcast, hosted by Michael Brown. This is an unfiltered conversation that examines how illicit narcotic trafficking is affecting every aspect of our society, including substance addiction, treatment programs, and law enforcement. Let's unpack the issue together.
I'm Michael Brown, and this is the Opioid Matrix. During the past 4 decades, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, also known as the DEA, has taken down some of the most infamous international drug cartels and transnational criminal organizations like the Medellin and Cali cartels in Colombia, the head of the Mexican Sinaloa cartel, El Chapo Guzman, the Russian merchant of death, Victor Bout, and the Afghan heroin trafficker and Taliban proxy, Haji Bashir Nourzai. DEA in 2023 seized more than 77 million fentanyl pills and 12,000 pounds of fentanyl powder, saving millions of lives from that one pill that kills. Now, despite these investigative successes, many today say that the war on drugs is lost and that America should adopt a safe use drug policy like the state programs in New York City, as well as decriminalize all drug usage. Well, that's a very big ask and perhaps a very dangerous one. Now, my guest today is one of DEA's top officials, and he's got a plan. I want to welcome to the Opioid Matrix my friend and former work colleague, DEA Special Agent in charge of the Detroit Field Division, Orville Greene. SAC Greene was appointed the head of the Detroit Field Division on April 27, 2022, and is responsible for all DEA operations throughout Michigan, Ohio, and Northern Kentucky. SAC Greene previously served as the Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Washington Field Division, Baltimore District Office from February 2020 to June of 2022. Now, during his tenure in Baltimore, he served as the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force Commander, where he supervised a number of enforcement groups. SAC Greene, welcome to the Opioid Matrix.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
You know, it's good to see you again. I think it's been maybe almost 4 or 5 years since we worked together in Pentagon City. You know, I turned 57 and, DEA put you out to pasture at 57 and you went on to become a very successful SAC. So congratulations on that promotion. But let's jump into it. Let's dive into it, right? So here we are. There are elephants in the room, and that's plural. Elephants in a room that has become very, very small. They are fentanyl, Mexican cartels, and Chinese precursor chemicals. But before we take on the cartels and the international aspects of the fentanyl supply chain, let's focus on your AOR. That's your area of responsibility, which is Ohio, Michigan, and Northern Kentucky. So the nation just celebrated the National Fentanyl Awareness Day on May 7th. So how is the Detroit Division taking, let's call it an all-of-society approach with raising fentanyl awareness, saving lives, and dismantling domestic trafficking organizations in your AOR?
Well, as you know, Michael, we continue to push on the enforcement front. You know, that's where we've been very strong for many, many years. I think what we're doing differently now, and definitely what I am doing differently, which is new to me within the last few years, is the outreach aspect of my role as the SAC and the coordination that I have and that I do with with community folks and with organizations that are in this educational / treatment space. So I think that is what has really sort of changed in terms of what we're doing, and I think it's a change for the better, right? Enforcement wise, I think we're too far behind to only continue to push enforcement simply because of the way in which the cartels are marketing their product and the way in which their robust effort to get their product out there. So educating, the folks, especially that demographic 18 to 45, that seems to be the most impacted relative to opioid overdoses, that I think is also helpful.
Now, I know you've had a couple operations. I think one was called Operation the Eagle or Engage Initiative, and the DEA Family Summits. And are those something that programs that you put together and initiated within your AOR?
So, the family summits, which started the first was in 2021, and this was a headquarters led initiative initially, and then got pushed out to the divisions, and each division then started networking and conducting their own family summits. And I have to tell you, at the time, having about 22 years in law enforcement, the first family summit we hosted in the Detroit Division, which was in Columbus, Ohio, I got a chance to meet with folks, to sit with folks, to hear the stories of folks who had lost loved ones to a fentanyl poisoning or a fentanyl overdose. I got to interact with people who've struggled with substance abuse disorder and who are, were on the road to recovery or in recovery, sharing their stories. And for the first time, I think, in my law enforcement career, I got an opportunity to actually meet the people who we're supposed to, that we're supposed to serve, right? Our customers. We spend a lot of time, in our careers with the bad guys, right? Sort of helping them, get to righteousness and helping them sort of correct some of the mistakes they've made. And it helps us in our enforcement. But that was the first time I'd ever sat down and interacted with people who, the people who we were supposed to be taking care of. And it had a tremendous impact on me because, for one, I didn't recognize or understand the strength that it took to go from someone who was actively using and that journey that it is to get to recovery and then to get your life together and come back and share these embarrassing stories. And then this embarrassing period of your life to me was just, I didn't understand the strength up until that time that it took for people to get in that space, and really just the courage to share these things about yourself in the hopes of helping someone else avoid taking that same path. So for me, we've hosted 5 family summits. We have another family summit scheduled for this August in Cleveland, and that for me, and the partnerships that we've made as DEA with folks. And here's the theme that we always get: there's always at least one person in the room who says, "I can't believe I'm here talking to the DEA," or "I can't believe the DEA is responsible for putting this together." And all we are in that space with the family summits, we're facilitators. We're getting folks together who are similarly impacted by this issue. And if not for our family summits, a lot of these people would have never, there are a lot of people who still think they're in their own little world and they're the only ones who are going through it. And all we do is introduce them to resources. We introduce them to folks who are sort of ahead of them in that recovery process or in that grieving process. And it's been a complete game changer, I think, for us. And I think the way in which our community views DEA.
I think you're absolutely right. I mean, DEA has had to evolve over the years because, I spent 10 years in Detroit in the early 90s when the crack cocaine epidemic hit. And you're right. All we dealt with were the bad guys, right? We arrested them, we prosecuted them, we kicked people's doors in, we dragged their sons and daughters off to jail. And DEA was the bad guy. Community outreach suffered. Perhaps we overlooked a very important part of developing a better community liaison, which it sounds like you're doing now. But of course, the entire paradigm of who's suffering from drug use and addiction has changed, right? We're seeing, you're talking to parents whose kids and children were not predisposed to drug use. Maybe they took prescription pills and they got that infamous one pill that kills. And now parents are saying, how did this happen to my family, right? We did everything right. We were in the best schools. We took care of our children. They were happy. And now they're dead. I've had a number of mothers come on the opioid matrix and talk about, the loss of their children. And it's an incredibly painful journey. And in the 10 or 15 years that I worked enforcement in Detroit and other cities, we would talk to parents who lost their children in gang shootouts, also a tragic loss. But there was some indication that the parents knew that their children, mostly young males, were involved in dangerous criminal activity, and they saw this coming. But what you're talking about now in these family summits, you're talking to parents who had no idea what fentanyl or Mexican cartels were, and now their children are dead. And it's good that DEA has stepped in to fill that void and change. You're really changing that, what I would perceive as, it's kind of a negative image within the inner city communities and some communities at large.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree. And, I've also, as a result of sort of being on this other track, right? I've met some great folks and some great organizations. Fentanyl Fathers is one of them. A friend of mine now, Greg Swan, was one of the founders of Fentanyl Fathers. Greg and I participated in one of their events where they were in one of the schools close by here in Rochester Hills, not too far from where I live. And, you walk into the school and it's just a beautiful environment. And you think these kids are so privileged, and you recognize, and as Greg is putting on, his program, and there are the parents who've lost kids who are there, Greg being one of them, and they share their stories, and these kids see these videos of people who look like them, people who went to their school, who ended up being poisoned by fentanyl. It's really impactful, because I think that age group, right, that demographic of kids, these kids in high school, the ones who, we were all there at some point, right, where we knew everything and we felt invincible. And the challenge is, how do you get these kids to understand that you don't get that summer to experiment? You don't get that opportunity anymore, because one pill literally can kill. And I think we're making, with organizations like Fentanyl Fathers, who also participate in our family summit, I think we're making some headway. And if what we can do is sort of get into these spaces and help facilitate, and as a result of seeing that Greg put on that program, I also, again, I'm in Michigan, right? So my office is in Detroit. So I participate in other events in Detroit. And the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, Dawn Eisen, has it was One Detroit program, right? Which is, several pillars. There's enforcement, there's outreach. And so we're sitting in one of these executive meetings, and it occurred to me, Fentanyl Fathers, the program that they have would be, I think, well received, and is something that's needed in some of these inner city schools, right, in Detroit. And so, again, I didn't do anything other than just make that connection. So I introduced Greg to the folks in the room that I was sitting with, and and they're now getting that program into Detroit schools. So I think being in the space, just making that introduction, what folks are going to remember, wow, this was the DEA person that facilitated this, that made this happen. So again, it's not that we're not taking over any of these spaces. We're just simply going in and trying to figure, again, add value. How can we add value, in this particular space? And that's the same thing we're doing with Operation Engage.
No, I think you're absolutely right about, adding value. And that's something that DEA has to continue to evolve in, right? Not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector. You said working with prosecutors. I think, for a very long time, the prosecutors, we talk about law enforcement and prosecutors almost in two separate silos, but now I think it's really incumbent upon DEA and the prosecutor's office to work together, because it's not just about the bad guys, but it's about, saving lives. And you're right, going in those spaces where DEA traditionally has not gone. But in terms of the agents under your command in your AOR, how are you working with the agents to better understand and better relate to the community? So when they're making arrests, when they're out there in the field, how are they representing the agency these days?
Well, I think they continue to represent us well. right, and represent themselves well, represent the agency well. But I think you remember the challenge, right, for the agents still remain, having to get that job done. I think it's a mindset, right? There has to be this shift in the mindset. I think as a working agent, you're just laser focused on your investigation, your targets, right, and your prosecution. And I think that is what drives them. That's what helps them to make those right decisions. And I think to be able to operate in that space, I think, and I haven't been on the streets a long time, right? But I think what they're seeing now is completely different, and I think similar to crack, but different in that, the impact of fentanyl, I think, on families, especially with the overdoses that occur. We had an incident in Southfield a couple months ago where a father and his two friends, adult friends, OD'd. And they were found by the father's two kids who were, I think, 7. They were all not even teenagers. And the kids found them. So, I think law enforcement in general, now they're in a space where, they're having to deal with it. I think it does impact them. And I think it has changed the way in which they operate in that space, because it's completely different. It's not like you walk into a house, there, 10 kilos of coke in the basement. You take the kilos, you take the guy, you drag him out of there. There's the coordination and the outreach, I think, and all of those different things that I think they have to think about and that they see every day has definitely impacted them, and I think will change the way in which they operate.
Now, we were talking about parents talking to parents who lost their children to a fentanyl poisoning or overdose, as you stated. And many parents say to me, okay, what about the accountability, right? Who's being held accountable? It doesn't take multiple ounces of narcotics to kill an individual today. You can be a street dealer selling 1 to 2 gram street packs. That 1 gram is enough to kill an adult in 30 seconds. So how are we dealing with the accountability, holding people who distribute fentanyl and street gram quantities accountable, especially with the issues of equity? You're talking about Detroit, which is primarily African-American city. So how do we manage equity? How do we manage effective accountability without turning the community against us again, like we saw during the crack cocaine era?
Well, I think the community, they want accountability. I was at a town hall several weeks ago, and in that town hall, there was a father who, his adult daughter, was poisoned, fentanyl poisoning in Detroit, and he reaches out, and so he posed this question, what do I do? Again, accountability, and I had a sidebar with him, gave him my card, gave him my number. He called me. Obviously, I kicked this to one of my groups to follow up on, fairly quickly. So within a day or so, what the investigators learned was that there was a poisoning. It wasn't necessarily handled by the responding officers the way in which we think, right, in which we expect it to be handled. But as they peeled the layers back, they also found that the family members who were there were uncooperative, right? So they were uncooperative. It was a setting where sort of multiple folks, possibly family members, were, some degree complicit in this whole thing. And so I don't think that happens that often, but it does happen. So that's one layer of complication that we had. So here's a dad who wants accountability, and another side of the family who's not necessarily facilitating that. We have that issue a lot where folks are embarrassed that this has happened to their family, and they absolutely do not want to engage with law enforcement on that particular issue. So we have those instances, and also, there are other, again, local law enforcement is the first on that scene. And so getting those folks trained up, getting those folks to understand sort of how to deal with these scenes when they arrive, that's also another challenge. There's some agencies that are better than others. In Cincinnati, we have a phenomenal response program in Cincy. We have locals, we have our TFOs, DEA TFOs, and agents that are called out and respond to these scenes and sort of treat them like homicide scenes. So in terms of the equities that you talk about, I think we could be better in that space, because it's not seamless. It's really ad hoc. You get great service here and awful service over here, right? So how can we work on that? How can we make that better? And I think that for us, between law enforcement, federal, state and local prosecutors, that's a space I think we could be much better in.
Yeah, because it seems like obviously DEA does not want to get into the prosecutions and arrests of multiple street gram dealers, right? That's a state and local prosecution area. DEA is dealing with the larger federal cases. But if you're HIDTA groups, your high intensity drug trafficking groups, and your task force officers, your TFOs, as you mentioned in Cincinnati, do you see during the area of red rum, right, which was DEA working with state homicide investigators on drug related homicides? Do you see a reemergence of red rum, right, reconnecting with state and local law enforcement to have better investigations, starting with those street gram dealers and working it up the chain, and working your complex conspiracies? Well,
so my concept of red rum is what I saw in New York, right? And I think every AOR sort of tailored their red rum teams to what that challenge was in that particular area. In New York, our red rum teams were dealing with those robbery crews, with the guys who would target other drug dealers and murder them and take their drugs. So it was more high level in terms of the targets, the intersection of drug trafficking and just I think extreme violence, right? Where guys would come in and murder you for 5 kilos of coke or, for what they thought was a load. So I think in terms of what we're doing relative to overdoses, to poisonings, I think we're really good in that space, because in the example I mentioned with the instance where the kids found the adults, we have a TFO from the Southfield Police Department, and Southfield, the chief reached out, and that TFO led that investigation. Now, we weren't able to charge the individual with the death resulting, well, not as yet anyway, but we were able to remove this person from the street. So again, whether it's high level or, when you have a person who's deceased as a result of someone who's, just again, callously distributing a product that he or she knows can kill someone, I think that is very much a space, whether this person is, moving 10 pills or, 10,000 pills, I think that's a space we're happy to jump into to lend that support. It may not have to be a federal prosecution, but in whatever way in which we can bring resources as DEA to help mitigate this issue, we're absolutely a willing partner, and that's my take on it. That's my philosophy. We're here to support.
No, I think in terms of breaking out of those silos, for a long time back, when I was on the job, if it didn't fit DEA's profile, we didn't deal with it. HSI, Customs, everybody had their own lanes and they stayed in those lanes. But I think, you're right. If we're really going to tackle fentanyl, outside of the bilateral issues with China and Mexico, it's going to take a really tight network between state and local law enforcement, prosecutors, as you mentioned, all pitching in to provide those resources. Yeah. But, when we look at Cincinnati, we look at Kentucky, we look at Michigan. Michigan, I think currently Michigan has one of the lowest opioid poisonings across the nation. That's to say it decreased from, say, 3,800 a few years ago to about 2,600. So it's still high. So we're still seeing the impact of Sinaloa and the Jalisco new generation cartel, moving fentanyl into your AOR. What type of investigations are you structuring? How are you trying to build a wall to decrease, this high level distribution to low level distribution? Because across the nation, we're only seeing increased numbers. As you seize 77 million fentanyl pills, another 77 million are coming in to replace it.
Yeah, I just want to just to step back for a minute, go back to something you said about, sort of what the lanes were, right? And understanding the lanes.
Sure.
There are no longer any lanes. And I think that's how I think the drug game has changed significantly. There was a time where we could easily articulate, okay, this is local, right? Okay, this is state, and this is the Fed lane. That's all changed. I don't know if you remember, back when we were in headquarters together, and I ran the regional local impact section. We had the domestic cartel initiative, and this was where we were using the data resources from the Special Operations Division to link those street level cases, right? And we were mostly using telephone data to link those street level cases to cartels. And what I learned, back in 2018, was that these relationships existed. Now, they were sort of few and far between for the most part, but those relationships existed in that there were street suppliers who were talking directly to Mexico and talking directly to cartels, all right, or to cartel members or to sources in Mexico. That is now the norm. So to say a guy who's, who gets a couple kilos of fentanyl, could easily be going down to Mexico and have these relationships, these source relationships, which, creates challenges for us because, again, you've got a consistent, a consistent source, right? A consistent source, a consistent supply, a pretty robust product that's coming in. There's no longer in that space where we can articulate that, okay, that's just a state case. We had another department working a case, again, local PD working what they thought was an organization in their AOR. On the day they did the search warrant, they seized, I think it was well over 10, 12 kilos of fentanyl. Quickly realized, okay, we need the feds to be a part of this. Again, we had a TFO in from that department in our office, and that individual quickly transitioned. So those are the relationships that we need to continue to build. Those are the relationships we need to maintain, where folks know if they get into a space where they need that support, okay, DEA is here. They know exactly how to get to us, where to get to us, and we can help facilitate that prosecution or to help build that case out. So it's in terms of what we're doing, we're continuing to work our investigations like we always have, except I think the analysis, again, with having our counter threat teams in Merrifield, utilizing our analysts a lot more and making those connections, building those cases out, making those connections, because ultimately, what are we looking to do? I am looking to connect my local 1 kilo case to the larger organization, to Sinaloa, to CJNG, or whatever the affiliate organization is, right? Tying it back to those organizations. So wherever we start, we're looking to build that back and to make those larger connections.
No, that's good. I mean, because, again, back in that reference to my time, we did an investigation. You had these large regional distributors who had the contacts. Only they had the contacts with the cartels, right? If you were a smaller DTO, drug trafficking organization, Crips, Bloods, what have you, Latin Kings, you had to go through a regional contact. But now the cartels have said, you know what? Let's cut out that middleman and develop all these multiple sub-distributors that we can just have direct contact with. That small entrepreneur, 5-gang, street gang group that wants to get into fentanyl, now they have a contact with Sinaloa. So it seems like to counter that, should DEA consider hiring more agents to make sure every police department has a TFO or every DEA regional office, residential office, PO office. There's a task force officer or a DEA agent part of that group, so we can complete that networking and make sure every case, especially related to fentanyl, gets addressed with appropriate resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Now, we're all having, I think law enforcement across the board, we're all having challenges with, with recruitment and retention. And in terms of TFOs, that's something that's driven by that local department. And I think they have to see the value and understand the value of having that relationship or of having that representation. The departments I mentioned, which is Livonia PD and Southfield, they understand that value, right? To be able to seamlessly transition from what they thought they had to now this larger thing that should be looked at, from a different angle. So absolutely, that's important, and that's a part of my job is building these relationships, and we've done some interesting things in trying to build those relationships. And again, everyone's having challenges with staffing, so I'm going to a chief or I'm going to a sheriff and I'm saying, hey, you should give me a TFO over here, to be a part of this thing. I have to help them see that value. One of the things we've done, and my ASAC out in Cleveland has been very good at this, is organizing these trips down to the El Paso Intelligence Center and also to the southern border, so that these local Ohio law enforcement executives can see how this larger issue impacts, in the briefings that they're getting, how these larger issues impacts them. Like, why should I care, being in this small jurisdiction? Why should I care about what's happening on the southern border? Why should I care about Sinaloa? Why should I care about CJ&G? And it's because it impacts all of us. And, there's a high likelihood that they're sitting on intel that we could use, but if you don't know what you're looking at or what you should be looking for, how can you add value to the game, right? How can you bring resources, add value to this thing it is that we're all involved with, that we're all a part of?
No, you're right. I mean, intelligence, right? I mean, I think you would agree that intelligence is the basis of all of our investigations. Like, we have Special Operations Division collecting that intelligence. Now you looks like you're trying to branch it out even further within your AOR to expand beyond the 3-state responsibility. But, I always hate to get into the political issues, but when you talk about recruitment, police officers are retiring or not taking the job, you have the defund the police movement, right? You have programs in, like, New York City, for example, Safe Site drug injection locations, vending machines that sell materials, drug use kits for crack cocaine. It seems DEA now is in direct competition with progressive policies in some states that seem to be enabling drug addiction. How are you and your AOR countering those elements that are pushing for safe drug supply, state-sponsored drug supply, and decriminalization of drug usage?
Well, that's not a space that I get into. That's not a space at the local level, yeah, even at the SAC level that we get involved with.
Okay.
I think sometimes we find ourselves at similar events, but our position is what it is, and I think, again, all you have to do is just look at the news, read a paper, get on the internet. A lot of these cities, a lot of these states that adopted these permissive drug use policies, they're all walking that back to the extreme because it does not work. Again, I think all you have to do is just look at the examples that are out there. It does not work. San Francisco comes to mind. Seattle comes to mind, right? Portland comes to mind, and we're all seeing that doesn't work. Throwing everyone in jail, especially people with a with a medical issue, which is what addiction is, right? Throwing people, that doesn't work. Allowing everyone to use hard drugs, that doesn't work either, right? So where's the solution? The solution is somewhere towards the middle, which is, providing the resources that the folks who have a substance use disorder need, and holding accountable those folks who prey on people like that. So it's a mix of it. We're closer to the middle and find a solution than we are to any of the extremes.
No, I think you're right. I think recently the new mayor of Philadelphia, Mayor Parker, has put together new programs to address the tenderloin issue. And of course, Colorado has pulled back their Bill 110, which they passed, I think it was 2020, which decriminalized drug use, which included fentanyl for a period of time. But then they saw their overdose, poisonings increase, homelessness, substance use, abuse, addiction, mental illness, all increased. And so now they're pulling it back. But it seems like some states are still pressing forward with, hey, we can get it right. We know the formula. But I think as you commented, these programs aren't working, and you're seeing an increase in drug trafficking, which also enable the cartels. So let's roll it back a little bit, back to your AOR. What type of investigations or incidences are you seeing related to internet drug trafficking, right? You go on TikTok, you go on any of these apps, and you're door dashing your narcotics, fentanyl right to your house.
Yeah, so we've had, and we continue to have these, to work these dark web investigations. And, the ones I can recall, so we had the Banmeet Singh investigation in Columbus, and he was he just pled, he was, and this was the investigation where we seized the 150 million in cryptocurrency. So we continue to work those investigations again because the internet, the dark web, does provide some level of anonymity. It's sometimes challenging to determine what level are we at when we start these investigations and where we're into these investigations, making purchases, etc. Historically, before we ever went out and did a buy, before your GS would ever even authorize that buy, we had to know who were we buying from, right? Was this person a part of an organization? I think with those other cases, it's a little different. And, and as we get started and sort of invested in these investigations, we're able to identify sort of, again, like with Banmeet Singh, like, okay, this person's an international trafficker. This person's someone, with some reach and someone we should be targeting. But we're constantly, as best we can, working those types of investigations. And, they do pose some challenges, and sometimes you have no idea where this person is. This person could be sitting in Philly, or they could be sitting in India. It could be sitting in London, and sending stuff to the U.S. We had an investigation in this was in Cleveland, started with jail calls being intercepted. So again, high-speed investigators sitting in the jail, listening to these calls and recognizing with an inmate that something was off. Provided this information to a Ohio State Highway Patrol trooper who was a DEA TFO sitting in Cleveland. Now, this TFO did outstanding work with this investigation, looking at those calls and monitoring this person's calls and recognizing that this individual from a facility in Youngstown was coordinating with a trafficker in Rome, in Italy, to get fentanyl analogs to the U.S. that his family was helping him to distribute, and that they were also getting into the prison system. So, again, this was a dark web case that we got into, not necessarily being on the dark web, right? But again, we have folks in facilities. We give them iPads. They have access to the internet because. Right. I think in being kind and gentle, we want people to still, because at some point these people get out of these facilities. And what we would like to see them get out better than they went in. And, and what happens is, obviously, some people abuse the system. And I remember having taken a trip to Italy, and I was sitting here with the chief prosecutor in this district in Italy. And her question for me was, well, why would you give them computers? She just couldn't understand why we would arm these people who aren't necessarily going to follow, who've established they don't like following the rules. And why would we give them this opportunity, to create additional challenges for ourselves, but we are in that space as well. It's a completely different space to be in terms of trying to work an investigation. But, not all of these things are local, a tremendous amount of them. You can still order fentanyl through the mail from China. There's still these sites that, again, you can still get on and still get these packages, and you have the reshippers. It comes into a particular location, and then these reshippers sort of in the U.S. kicking them out from all over the place. And it's crazy enough, they'll send you a tracking number, tell you, hey, you'll get your tracking number, within X amount of days once you pay for the product. So it's a completely different space. I don't think one that I think as the federal government, we've completely mastered this yet, but I think we're getting better.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to fast track that because, as the cartels are evolving incredibly rapidly. Excuse me. And when you look at let me ask, are you working with the private industry, right? The parcel companies. I know back in the day, they used to have the parcel interdiction team. Every morning you take a task force out with your canines, you go to some of the local international companies, transport companies, parcel companies. And every day we would seize multiple packages of narcotics and money, coming from California, Texas to Detroit for distribution. So it seems the cartels have adapted to modern technology much faster than law enforcement. What within your AOR are you looking at new technology innovations, either drug identification equipment, working with U.S. Postal Inspections with some of their scanning techniques, more canines? How are you approaching that technology evolution that the cartels are using?
Yeah, well, we're still continuing to run those operations, and again, in conjunction with our partners. Our state and local folks are also in that space, again, doing that work, right? Coordinating, collaborating federally when that needs to happen. So that's a space we're familiar with. Those are relationships we have. Here's a new trend that it's new to me, right? New to us because we're now stumbling onto that to the degree that it's happening. Is TSA. We're all familiar with 10 pounds of weed, 50 pounds of weed in the check luggage, coming out of California or from the Southwest border, right? Coming into, my wife ran the airport group when we were in DC, so she had Dulles and Reagan, and the amount of marijuana that they would get from folks just throwing it in their luggage and coming into and flying into Dulles, and then ending up in a courthouse, a state courthouse out in Leesburg, and wondering why they were being remanded for 50 pounds of weed because they didn't understand Virginia's not necessarily the place you want to have that. Other places no one cares, but in some AORs they do still care. We're all familiar with that. What I was not familiar with was the fact that folks were also doing this with fentanyl. We just had, a few weeks ago where we seized in ghost luggage, right? This is where person buys a ticket, checks a bag, but never gets on that flight. And what we're seeing is that folks are also putting kilos of fentanyl pills, kilos of fentanyl powder in check luggage, and that's making its way across the country. Now, when you have a conversation with TSA, what TSA will tell you is that our equipment's designed to look for bombs, right? And okay, awesome. But what happens, right, if a kilo of fentanyl, for whatever reason, contaminates the cargo hold, right? And gets into the cockpit with, you've now got a bomb, essentially, but there are different aspects of trafficking that we're stumbling onto, and we're seeing holes, right, in our defenses that we can't fix immediately, right? So we're trying to have some conversations about how can we get into the space that it's something that's happening, it's obviously something that's been happening because the amount of product that we seized clearly, the first time you throw 200,000 pills, in your checked luggage to ship it across the country is not the first time you've done this. You run the test loads, you see if it's a viable option, but that is a space that we need to, again, be better in. We absolutely need to be better in that, in working together. How we're going to bridge this gap and sort of start this conversation or have this conversation with TSA. I don't know, but I think we're just going to start with like, hey, here is the challenge.
Yeah, I mean, we're right back to technology innovation, right? Understanding better technology.
Yes.
To scan and to look for these substances, and of course the trains, right? Amtrak and other commercial transportation organizations. I can only imagine the cartel, if I could put up a board and see the traffic from East Coast to West Coast, as the old saying, trains, planes, and automobiles, right? For distribution, will react to it. But within the last few minutes, I'm hoping this episode, a lot of chiefs of police and other officers within your AOR will hear this. How can they reach out to you? Do they reach out to your public information officer or go through DEA headquarters? What's the fastest way to get law enforcement and families who have concerns and questions to reach out, to the Detroit Division and get some assistance?
Well, as far as the chiefs, I should know absolutely all of them. I'm meeting the new chief in Cleveland on Monday. So we go out to Cleveland. So I have some meeting. So I do know all of these people. They all have my cell. Some have my personal cell. I've been here. 2 years we've been at this and building these relationships and working on these relationships. My ASACs throughout the divisions, out in Cleveland, Cincinnati, and Columbus all have really great relationships, robust relationships. So it's not hard for them the law enforcement community to find us or to get a hold of me, for whatever reason. Our PIO, Brian McNeil, he's, you can find him in just going through the Detroit Division, DEA Detroit Division website. You can find us, and we'll get that information so you can put it out there. But if folks have a question for us, our community outreach specialist, Wendy Jackson, Wendy is also very much accessible and available. We have these existing relationships with our family summits, that the one we'll be hosting in Cleveland in August. We have these relationships with these folks who, for the most part, most people know how to find us, but the ones who don't, through our PIO or our community outreach specialists who would like some, who have ideas or would like to have this relationship with us, we're here, and I go to wherever people invite me to be. I don't want to impose on them, but again, the chief in my town that I live in Michigan, invited me to come out to a town hall. The sheriff of Oakland County did. Absolutely, sheriff, whatever it is you need. So we're trying to get into these spaces where, again, we just try to add value. Again, meeting that one dad who wanted, some resolution. He wanted to know why or what could be done. And, within a matter of days, a matter of a day, someone had reached out to him. Now, I don't know if there's anything we could do just based on those circumstances. But again, here is a citizen, an individual who had an issue, spoke to the special agent in charge of the Detroit Division and got the kind of service that I think he expected or thought he should have gotten, from folks like us who are really responsible to these people.
No, I think you're right. I think people sometimes you just want somebody to listen to them, right? They want
Yes.
to feel like they matter. And it sounds like you've got a good handle on that with your engagement and your family summits. But I want to offer you the Opioid Matrix platform. If you have any need to get messaging out, programs, please reach out to us. We'd be happy to sponsor the Detroit Division or any of your associates with any of their messaging. But again, I want to thank the special agent in charge of the Detroit Field Division, Orville Greene, for taking the time to come on and explain some of DEA's programs and his AOR. what he's doing to bridge the gap between law enforcement and the community, because it's about breaking down silos and all working as one network. Again, SAC Greene, thank you for coming on the Opioid Matrix.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Rigaku Analytical Devices is a U.S.-based manufacturer of advanced analytical equipment for the identification of unknown substances. Utilizing Raman in our devices means we can non-destructively scan through packaging with a result of identification in less than 1 minute. Rigaku is committed to supporting and partnering with your agency to tackle this problem together. To learn more, visit rigakuanalytical.com. Thank you for joining host Michael Brown for this episode of the Opioid Matrix, a journey into the rabbit hole, a Rigaku podcast. Keep connected with us by subscribing to the show on your favorite podcast player. If you like what you've heard, please rate the show. No matter the controversy around the illegal drug supply chain, our mission is to save lives. Thanks for listening. Until next time.